34. Exams were never fun. Even if you were 12 years older than everyone else taking the exams and had, in fact, literally done some of the spells in your sleep. And the complaining from everyone else about how difficult it was to turn a teapot into a tortoise. Although that wasn't nearly as bad as Hermione moaning about how her tortoise looked more like a turtle. Hermione, Harry said patiently. We've been over this. You did the spell for changing a teacup into a tortoise, not the spell for changing a teacup into a turtle. And don't think Professor McGonagall won't get a letter from the new magical chapter of Peter for this. Seriously, what is with everyone and their constant abuse of animals? Harry, look at how everyone treats people who don't happen to have magical powers and ask me that again, Hermione told him. Anyway, getting back to the fact that I'm going to fail Dash. Oh, please, Hermione, Ron scoffed. No one fails. Ever. Marcus Flint did, Hermione reminded them. Harry snorted. What? She demanded. Nothing, just that he didn't fail, he just showed up to play Quidditch, Harry explained. Hermione rolled her eyes at that. Right. Like anyone would come all the way back to Hogwarts and convince everyone that they had to repeat a year just to play a couple of Quidditch games. There was silence for a moment as the three boys exchanged pitying glances. I totally would, Ron said. Me too, Neville agreed. They would have to pay me, decided Harry. Right, because that's not pathetic at all, Hermione rolled her eyes. It's not pathetic, Ron corrected her. It's Quidditch. And even if it were possible for anyone to fail at Hogwarts, Neville quickly changed the subject as Hermione looked to be bracing herself on a rant about Quidditch fanatics. Having the end result look like a practically identical species isn't exactly the worst thing that could happen. I mean, look at Ron's tortoise, it's still PT. Hey, at least I didn't lose my head and accidentally turn my teacup into a flock of flamingos, Ron shot back. Oh, right, Hannah Abbott, Harry smiled fondly. One of these days that girl is going to learn to keep her head in an exam. Mine still wasn't as good as Harry's, though, Hermione pouted. Professor McGonagall said she'd never seen a more perfect tortoise in all her years at Hogwarts. I just can't compete with that. Don't feel bad, Hermione, Harry reassured her. McGonagall just thinks I'm a transfiguration prodigy like my dad apparently was. But all the other teachers say the same thing. Hermione pointed out. Well, except for Snape. Snape had, as a matter of fact, docked Harry's potion 5 points because he had ended up using a modified recipe for the confusing concoction that Luna always swore by. Apparently her mum had made the changes. Don't you mean Slughorn? Harry grinned. Right before their potions exam, Sirius had apparently decided that since Snape's hovering tendencies were such a distraction, replacing Snape's unpleasant countenance with Slughorn's physically incapable of being imposing one would make them all feel better. Of course, half the class didn't even know who Slughorn was, but it was the thought that counted. Besides, Harry knew full well and was amused as hell. And it was a good thing that he was so amused, because otherwise he'd be annoyed that Hermione had, once again, refused to use the cheering charm on him for the exam. And to make matter worse, Professor Flitwick seemed to agree with her and let her do the charm on somebody else. Hagrid's exam was a great deal more interesting than Don't Kill the Flobberworms, which Harry vaguely remembered it to be last time. This time, they all had to take a ride on a hippogriff. Needless to say, this was Harry's easiest exam to date. The rest of the class vehemently disagreed with that, but the fact that no one else knew what to do was their own damn fault for making him deal with Buckbeak alone during their first class. Their astronomy exam went okay, or so Harry was told. He kind of fell asleep 10 minutes into it, but his friends assured him that when Professor Sinistra came by to give him his oral exam, he had sleep answered all of her questions correctly. So maybe that was the easiest exam ever. In herbology, Harry took great delight in making fun of his classmates for not knowing any charms to cast to keep from getting sunburned as they all turned bright red as the hours wore on. The exam itself was pretty boring, but then, that was herbology. Even if it was dealing with magical and potentially lethal plants, the fact remained that it was a class on plants. He just couldn't find it within himself to really care one way or another. Muggle Studies was his first new exam of the timeline and it was actually rather enjoyable. They basically just took a port key to London, were handed a few pounds, and told to try and act inconspicuous. Granted, they had to do a paper on the experience once it was over, but still, he and Hermione had had fun pretending to be tourists. Divination was also easy, since it just took Harry making something up, which he had been doing on a regular basis ever since he came back to the past. Harry told Trelawney that he saw a group of people trying to bring Voldemort back to life and getting arrested. She jumped a little at the name, but Harry ignored it. He didn't know that was going to happen, per se, but so help him it had better. And if nothing else, Harry's vehemence seemed to impress the professor. Their history of magic exam was probably the biggest deviation from what had happened during the previous timeline's exams. Instead of a written test about medieval witch hunts that nobody cared about and only ever ended up killing muggles anyway, Sirius announced that everyone was going to have to write an essay about something they'd learned in his class that year, ranging from 200 words to 1,600 words, depending on how well they did in his oral quiz. Basically, he called on them at random and asked them a question about what they'd covered that year. The first one to miss a question was out and had to write the 1,600-word essay, the second one to miss a question had to write the 1,400-word essay, and so on. Harry was kind of miffed because he'd lost to Hermione at the last second with what is the name of the orphanage Tom Riddle grew up in. Like he cared. Still, a 400-word essay was a piece of cake. He was tempted to go over to annoy his classmates who had to write more, but had foregone that for turning it in within 10 minutes and playing hangman with Sirius while everyone else wrote and Hermione revised. Needless to say, when her 200-word essay turned out to be a little over 3,000, no one was exactly surprised. Annoyed, granted, but not surprised. And as the students were used to having their essays be a certain number of inches or, recently, pages, Sirius cast a spell on all of their paper to automatically list how many words they had so far. Harry's favorite exam, of course, was Defense Against the Dark Arts. The obstacle course was great fun and reminded him a little bit of Aura training, on that first day where they were weeding out those who couldn't hack it at the real training. Harry, of course, finished first with full marks. This annoyed Hermione to no end considering he'd done it backwards, with his eyes closed, and without his wand. But that was just what she got for beating him in Sirius's class. There was no way his godfather would let him live down being outsmarted by a 14-year-old, even if it was Hermione. I can't believe you took directions from our exam, Harry laughed at Ron, who had encountered problems upon reaching the Hinkypunk when he had, for some reason, followed its advice and ended up sinking waist high into the quagmire. What would you know? You had your eyes closed the entire time. It's not like you could have stopped it and asked for directions, Ron replied. I get that you're sore that I beat you so blatantly in this exam, Harry told his agitated friend. But you have to remember, this is my subject. You had the fastest time yet. Ron pointed out, still irritated. My subject, Harry reiterated. Your modesty is really your best quality, Harry, Hermione said dryly as she came up behind them. Hey, Harry greeted her. How was Sonnet spewing McGonagall? She wasn't, Hermione answered. Upon seeing the twin looks of confusion on Harry and Ron's faces, she elaborated, this time she rapping an opera about my failings. Harry laughed. Now that I have to see. I wonder if I can dash. No, Ron interrupted. I can see what you're going to ask and I'm telling you right now, she'll never do it, mate. Spoil sport, Harry pouted. Hey, what's taking Neville? He's been in there with the boggart for over 20 minutes now. Hermione and Ron exchanged meaningful glances. Well, Hermione began, trying to be tactful. His boggart is rather intimidating. It is not dash Harry started to say when he was interrupted by Neville bursting out of the trunk with the boggart, screaming. Oh shut up, Harry said annoyed as Ron started giggling. What happened? Ron asked between his laughter. Neville looked tentatively at Harry. You wouldn't, really, convert your old house into a haunted house, would you? Or allow people to keep their name off of the list of registered animagus by paying extra? Or give the house elves a union? Or allow goblins to use wands on Mondays since they don't exist? Or make everyone wear pink on Thursdays? Or make do the hippogriff by the Weird Sisters Magical Britain's national anthem? Or regularly import llamas and releasing them in random places? Or dash? Dear God, how many of those do you have? Hermione asked, horror-struck. Neville shrugged. Remember, I was in there for a while. Harry sighed. To answer your question, Neville, no, I would not. But I do plan on becoming minister one day, thanks for the idea. With that, Neville promptly fainted. Harry rolled his eyes. He is so faking. He nudged the boy with his foot. Probably. This year, Harry didn't even bother sitting down at the Gryffindor table during the end of the year feast. He knew he'd have to bail very shortly anyway when Dumbledore started reading off point totals, so he just made his way to the Slytherins at the beginning of the meal. Why are you here? A black boy Harry thought might be in a few of his classes asked. I can't possibly be with the Gryffindors when we win the House Cup, Harry explained. And I've sat with the Ravenclaws a few times already recently. Why can't you sit with the Hufflepuffs? The boy asked, eyeing him warily. Blaise, don't. Theodore warned, sitting down next to the boy in question, Blaise Zabini apparently. Don't what? Blaise asked, confused. I just asked him a question. Talking encourages him, Theodore explained. I don't need to be encouraged, Harry claimed. I'm a Gryffindor. We noticed, Draco said, sliding into the seat beside Harry. And as for why I'm not at the Hufflepuff table, well, the first time Draco and I met we were talking about the houses. We decided that if we ended up in Hufflepuff, he'd leave and I'd defect. Since I'd have to come over here anyway if I went over to the Hufflepuff table, I decided to just spare myself a trip and come here instead, Harry explained. How can you defect from something if you haven't actually been a part of it in the first place? Blaise couldn't help asking. Blaise! Theodore cried. Sorry, he apologized. But Draco's encouraging him, too. Why aren't you yelling at him? Theodore rolled his eyes. Draco, God help him, likes Potter. Not to mention my teenage rebellion, Draco added. That reminds me, are your parents still pissed? Harry asked. Draco snorted, but didn't say anything. Harry took that as a yes. Dumbledore stood up then. This year has been an exceptionally high-scoring year as far as house points go, the highest I've ever seen. In fourth place is Hufflepuff with 9,307 points. In third place we have Ravenclaw with 9,526 points. In second place we have Slytherin with 10,094 points. And in first place, with the single greatest number of points accumulated during the course of 1 year, we have Gryffindor with 13,877 points. What's with these freakishly high point tallies? Draco asked. Sirius gives out points like candy, Harry explained. Not to mention his 50 points to anyone who he hears say Voldemort thing. For once, I do not actually have any last-minute points to give out. Dumbledore paused as Sirius leaned over and said something. Correction, I award Harry Potter 50 points for finally saying Voldemort, bringing Gryffindor's total up to 13927. Harry banged his head on the table. Damn him. Dumbledore? Draco asked. No, Sirius. I was so careful not to say that in front of him this year, but now, and damn Neville, too, for predicting that we'd win again. Everyone knew you were going to win, Theodore pointed out. Not helping, Harry said. Not trying to, Theodore replied. Seriously, does everyone get to talk to Potter but me? Blaise complained. So how did you beat the curse? Harry asked Remus curiously. Curse? Remus repeated absently as he packed. You know, the one Voldemort put on the defense against the dark arts position so Dumbledore would have to get a new one every year. Seriously immature of him, by the way, Harry reflected. Oh, I didn't. My contract was only for a year, Remus told him. Oh. Harry paused. What are you going to do now, then? I mean, didn't you say your lycanthropy made it kind of hard to find work? Remus smiled at that. Normally, yes, but Sirius dash. Totally hired him to be Lord Black, Sirius interrupted, barging into Remus' office. He hired you to be Lord Black? Harry looked to Remus for confirmation. Remus nodded. He likes the title but he doesn't want to deal with all the responsibilities and I needed a job. Besides, Sirius added. Moonis, like, the most responsible person I know. He knows all the laws, he's a half-blood so it ought to annoy anyone I'm related to who isn't Remus's future girlfriend or her mother and dash. For the last time, Sirius, Remus cut in. Nymphadora is not my girlfriend. She lets you call her Nymphadora, Harry pointed out. Yeah, not even I get to do that, Sirius agreed. She lets Cedric Diggory and Charlie Weasley call her that, too, Remus said defensively. Harry nodded. Yeah, but those two are because she lost a bet. And she doesn't bet first name privileges anymore. I should know, I've tried. Nymphadora is a bit young for me, Remus insisted. Seeing as how she just graduated 2 years ago. I absolutely agree, Sirius said heartily, patting Remus on the back. Remus looked up, surprised. You do? Definitely, Sirius confirmed. For another 2 or 3 years. But then I expect you and her to start going out. I'm sure you'll be very happy together. But Harry and I expect joint godfather status. Aren't you going to warn me about breaking her heart? Remus asked, a bit dazed. And what's this about children dash? Why, are you planning on breaking her heart? Sirius challenged, pointedly ignoring the second question. Well, no, but dash Remus began. Then she can handle herself. She is well on her way to becoming an Auror, after all, Sirius said proudly. And I'm sure she could castrate you far better than I ever could. Remus gulped. Chapter 35. After another epic but nondescript summer, Harry and Sirius decided to end things by dragging Remus and Tonks along to the Quidditch World Cup. Remus because he was Sirius' best friend and Tonks because she was Sirius' sole cool relative. And also because they wanted Remus and Tonks nice and acquainted for when Tonks was actually old enough for Remus to date. The first people they met, naturally, were Cedric Diggory and his father, whose name Harry never could remember, who only seemed to want to talk about that one time Cedric beat Harry. It was kind of creepy, really. Ced told us all about you, of course, Mr. Diggory was saying. Said you're mad as a hatter but practically a demon on a broom. I said to him, Ced, that'll be something to tell your grandchildren, that will, you beat Harry Potter. How does it feel to have your father deciding that winning an amateur Quidditch match is going to be your greatest achievement in life? Harry asked curiously. Cedric made a face. Fantastic. I'd imagine it's almost as nice as having everyone decide that your greatest achievement will be making it to your second birthday, something everyone else has managed just fine without getting famous. Harry laughed. Touché. And it's not like it was even a fair match, anyway, since the Dementors came out of nowhere and attacked, Cedric continued. Harry, much as his pride was begging him not to, which was ironic to be sure, disagreed. You caught the snitch before you even realized the Dementors were there. While that might be slightly oblivious of you, it still meant that you had the snitch in your sights and I was nowhere near you. Even if the Dementors hadn't shown up, you still would have caught it. Cedric smirked. Does that mean you're admitting I'm better than you? Like hell, Harry scoffed. I've beaten you 2 games to 1. But I am the only one who's ever beaten you at Quidditch, Cedric pointed out. Which I'm sure your grandchildren will just love hearing about, Harry countered. If your popularity doesn't die down, they probably will. Cedric said, shaking his head. Besides, I've only ever played against you, Draco, and Cho. Saying I'm a better seeker than 3 other people isn't really saying much, Harry told the older boy. Hey, that reminds me. Did you make head, boy? Cedric gave him a strange look. Harry, I'm a 6th year. Harry blinked, surprised. You are? Crap, that makes it even worse. That makes what even worse? Cedric asked, confused. Word of advice, if you ever find yourself suddenly and mysteriously portkeyed to a graveyard, don't ask questions, don't look around, just grab the portkey again and get out of there, Harry said firmly. All right, Cedric agreed finally. That sounds oddly specific, do you dash? What can I say? Harry interrupted. I'm a divination prodigy. I don't believe in divination, Cedric replied immediately. I don't really care, Harry confessed. But you did agree to do that, so my work here is done. With that, Harry turned his attention back to the adults. That's fascinating, Amos, Remus was saying. Oh, right, Amos was his name. Oh well, Harry would probably end up forgetting it again as soon as he left, anyway. We have to keep moving, though. We're looking for the Weasleys. They promised to save us a spot for our tent. I quite understand, Amos said heartily. Don't let us keep you. I need to discuss that bill on werewolf rights you're working on with you when we get back to the ministry, though. I've got a few ideas on the subject myself. I'll stop by and see you first thing Monday, Remus promised. So you're working on a bill about werewolf rights? Harry asked as they set off again. Won't that cause problems because people will assume you're just doing it because you're a werewolf? Well, I am mostly doing it because I'm a werewolf, Remus admitted. If I weren't, I wouldn't be as aware of the blatant discrimination and appalling treatment we receive. Not to mention the fact that most people don't know about what did you call it, Sirius? His furry little problem, Tonks added. Oh, that was code for Remus is a werewolf. Harry deadpanned. I thought it meant that he had a badly behaved rabbit. How did you corrupt him so quickly? Remus demanded, turning to Sirius. You've only known him for about a year. It's not me, Sirius insisted, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. It's the genes. And partly me, I guess, but mostly just James. Remus just rolled his eyes. All in all, they were very grateful to finally reach the Weasleys. When they were walking through a rather pro-Irish section, Seamus had ambushed them and dragged them off to meet his mother, and Tonks almost started a riot by confessing that she didn't actually know who was playing besides whatever team that Crumb guy's on. Harry and Sirius, both avid Quidditch fans themselves, were currently refusing to speak to her. Hey, what took you so long? Ron asked. Tonks almost started a riot, Remus explained when Sirius and Harry pointedly didn't say anything. Realizing that the Weasleys were also somewhat of a family of Quidditch fanatics, he continued, don't ask. Did that take all day or something? Ginny asked. We've been here for 4 hours. Harry's eyes widened in horror at the thought of waking up that early during the summer. Why? Because we're not old enough to apparate like Bill, Charlie, and Percy, Ginny explained sourly. Does that mean that you haven't been here that long? God no, Harry shook his head vehemently. Remus and Tonks apparat while I did side-along apparition with Sirius. Dad! Why couldn't we do side-along apparition and get here at a normal time? Ginny demanded. Because we had 4 people who could apparat and 6 who couldn't, including Hermione and Neville, Arthur explained. I didn't want to make 2 trips. Grumbling under her breath, Ginny let it go. Hey, Hermione, Harry greeted his Quidditch enthusiasm challenged friend. Do you know who's playing? Of course, she replied, looking bemused. Ireland and Bulgaria. How could I not know that? No idea, Harry said honestly. Either way, this is Sirius's cool relative, Tonks. I think you two would get along. Even I know that Ireland and Bulgaria are playing each other, Percy said. Are you saying that someone here didn't? Possibly Tonks. Harry nodded sadly. I just don't get it. I mean, I know since Hermione just said who was playing I have no proof you knew before then, but I'm willing to give Oliver the benefit of the doubt on that one. Don't you mean give Emmy the benefit of the doubt? Percy asked. Harry shook his head. No, I'm pretty sure I meant Oliver, seeing as how it's all thanks to him that you have even a basic appreciation of the sport. And it's all thanks to my brothers that I needed Oliver's intervention, Percy continued. Speaking of, did the twins just bet their entire saving that Ireland will win the match but Crumb will get the snitch? Harry looked over at the twins, who were handing a sizable bag of money over to Ludo Bagman. Oh no. He breathed, remembering Bagman's chronic gambling and gobbling problems that had led to him practically stalking Harry during the tournament. You sound pretty confident, Harry noted, making his way over to his future business partners. You know what, I'll bet you 50 galleons that Ireland gets the snitch. The twins exchanged glances. We don't actually have dash Fred began. 50 galleons dash George continued. So we can't dash. In good conscience dash. Take that bet, Fred finished. You won't need 50 galleons if you win, Harry pointed out. And if not, it's not like I don't see you every day anyway. So again, how sure are you? The twins had a silent conversation with their eyes. We'll take it, George said finally. Here you go. Harry pulled out a large pouch of money, counted out 50 galleons, and put it in a smaller bag before handing it to the twins. Take good care of my money. There, that should take care of most of the twins' problems when Bagman proved not to be good for it. Of course, that wasn't likely to stop them from hounding Bagman anyone but, at least this way it might stop Molly from murdering her troublemaking sons and the father who let it happen. Betting with schoolchildren, Ludo. Barty Crouch asked disdainfully as he entered the clearing. Bagman really didn't have a response for that, seeing as how it was true. Never mind, Crouch said impatiently. I've been looking for you everywhere. The Bulgarians are insisting that we add another 12 seats to the top box. Oh, is that what they're after? Bagman asked. I thought the chap was asking to borrow a pair of tweezers. Bit of a strong accent. Next time you cannot understand an accent, kindly find someone to interpret for you, Crouch said sternly. Mr. Crouch. Percy greeted a little breathlessly, bowing slightly. Would you like a cup of tea? No thank you, Weasley, Crouch shook his head. I brought my own drink. With that, he took a sip of his flask. Harry started. Did Crouch just get Percy's name right? Although, come to think of it, it was a little strange how he kept getting it wrong before, since he clearly knew who Arthur was and you couldn't really miss that the two were related. Why, Barty, Bagman said with a grin. Is that whiskey you've got in there? Certainly not, Crouch looked highly affronted. I would never stoop so low as to drink on the job or at such an important international event like this. I'm just very particular about my tea, so I brought my own so as not to make a fuss. If you say so. Bagman sing-songed. Any news on Bertha Jorkins, yet? Arthur asked the other two department heads. Not a dicky bird, said Bagman comfortably. But she'll turn up. Poor old Bertha, memory like a leaky cauldron and no sense of direction. Lost, you take my word for it. She'll wander back into the office sometime in October, thinking it's still July. You don't think it might be time to send someone to look for her? Arthur suggested tentatively. The problem is, Arthur, that she went missing in Albania, Crouch explained. We have asked the authorities to be on the lookout for her, but that's about all we can do as it's out of our jurisdiction. Besides, no one really remembers seeing her so there aren't even any solid leads. We're hoping of course, but you know how these things are. She was probably attacked by a local dark wizard or some sort of dark creature. Harry felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered Bertha. She had come out of Voldemort's wand right before his parents. He didn't remember too much about her disappearance except that Voldemort had killed her after Pettigrew had brought her to him and that's how he knew of the tournament. But if Pettigrew were in Azkaban then what happened to Bertha? Was it just a coincidence? Harry hated coincidences. Where are you sitting? Arthur asked Sirius as everyone made their way into the giant stadium. Top box, Sirius said proudly. It was part of my reparation. Of course, the rest of it went to buying Harry a firebolt but. You don't mind because I'm your godson and you love me? Harry suggested. Let's go with that, sure, Sirius replied. That's where we're sitting, too, Arthur enthused. Bagman owed me a favor. The ministry is bending over backwards so I don't write that tell-all expose about life as an innocent man in Azkaban, Sirius countered. Ah, Harry. Fudge said warmly, standing up to greet him. So nice to see you again. And under better circumstances than last time, I'd like to think. Allow me to introduce you to the Bulgarian Minister of Magic. He doesn't speak a word of English, but dash. Really? Sirius perked up. I speak Bulgarian. Tonks looked at him in surprise. You do? Of course, Sirius nodded. So does your mother, come to think of it. After Dumbledore got appointed headmaster, our parents were debating whether to send us to Durmstrang. Of course, Durmstrang isn't actually in Bulgaria, but it has plenty of Bulgarian students and they made us learn all the languages they thought we might encounter. Really? Tonks was fascinated. What changed their minds? They decided the uniforms were tacky, Narcissa Malfoy replied, entering the box, followed by her husband and son. Hello, Sirius. Narcissa, Sirius nodded his head. Draco. He paused. I don't actually remember what your husband's name is. Lucius, Narcissa replied. I heard you gave away your title. I'm actually more of a regent than anything else. Remus clarified. I'm too busy to be bothered, Sirius added. Teaching at Hogwarts, having a life, very few people manage both, you know. So, do you think you could help translate? Fudge piped up. Sirius looked startled, like he'd completely forgotten about Fudge and his foreign language woes. Oh, certainly, yes. He moved over closer to the foreign minister and began conversing with him in his native tongue. Hi, Draco, Harry greeted. Narcissa shot him an icy look even as Draco waved back cheerfully. You want to sit by us? Harry offered. Draco considered it. As long as Neville sits on your other side so I won't get into a fight with the weasel or my father won't freak out because I look like I'm associating with Granger, it should be all right. Does your father even know who Hermione is? Neville asked, curiously. Being a pureblood himself and rather laid back as a rule, Neville had really never had any problems with Draco after first year when Draco realized that Neville wasn't the easy target he had initially pegged him for. No, but my mother might, Draco confided. Do we have to deal with him everywhere? Ron complained. I could go sit over by him if it bothers you, Harry volunteered. Ginny looked over at Draco's parents, who looked very much like they wanted to inflict bodily harm on Harry. You know, I think Malfoy will be fine here. Mother, father, I'm going to go sit by the boy who saved us all from you-know-who, Draco announced, knowing that as much as his parents might dislike Harry, they couldn't really refuse to let Draco sit by him after he phrased it like that. Arthur and Lucius spent the rest of the time before the match trading insults while Narcissa reluctantly made small talk with Remus and Tonks. At one point, Sirius came over to explain that the Bulgarian minister knew English just fine but he never liked Fudge so he was pretending not to speak it to annoy him. The two men were apparently having a grand old time insulting Fudge without anyone but Narcissa being the wiser. Harry knew the Irish mascots were leprechauns of course, but had forgotten what the Bulgarian one was and so was quite surprised when the field was stormed by Veela. Draco, Neville, and Ron, Harry noted with some amusement, all stood up and attempted to jump off the balcony and had to be held back by the non-male and or teenage members of the group. God, it's like you've never seen a Veela before, Harry said, shaking his head incredulously. Ron flushed. Why weren't you affected? Because I'm not as hormonal, Harry suggested. What? Ron asked. Never mind. Leprechauns, Arthur exclaimed when it was the Irish's turn to display their mascots. There you go. Ron yelled happily, stuffing a fistful of gold coins into Harry's hand. For the Omniarculars. Now you've got to buy me a Christmas present, ha! Harry hadn't wanted to make the Omniarculars he'd bought Ron and Ginny a substitute Christmas present, but Ron had insisted. That leprechaun gold disappears after a couple of hours, right? Harry pointed out. What? Ron looked upset. Yes, they just make it to amuse themselves, Hermione explained. It causes all kinds of controversy when people pay in leprechaun gold and it disappears as no one can really tell if the person who paid in it knew it was leprechaun gold or if they themselves were also tricked. It's a good thing that it doesn't last either, or else think of what inflation would be like. Besides, Neville added. Since the gold was everywhere, you can't really pay him back using something that anyone could pick up off the ground. Looks like you're back to no Christmas present, Ginny added, annoyed that Ron had included here in the no present deal as she had no problem accepting the 10 galleon gift. Then again, she had a small fortune herself sitting in her own private Gringotts vault that her family didn't know about from the basilisk, so maybe that was why. Don't worry, Ron, Harry hurried to reassure his friend, who was looking more distraught by the second. Christmas is still 4 months away, I'll probably forget by then and get you something anyway. That's not the point. Ron burst out. You're always paying for everything. It's because I'm an orphan, Harry explained. And because I'm not afraid to exploit my fame for all it's worth. Ron still looked a bit disgruntled, but he quieted down after that. The match was interesting enough, if a bit predictable. After all, nothing he had done differently in the past 3 years did anything to make the Irish team or Crom any worse and so once again the twins won their bet, though this time they didn't lose their savings and actually made nearly 13 galleons on it. Harry was just happy that he was still able to follow the play without the aid of Omniarculars, which he had been worrying about as it had also been 3 years since his last high-speed Quidditch match. Of course, the after-game celebration was cut a bit short as screams and shouts suddenly broke out at the campsite. Harry, Arthur burst into Harry's tent. We've got to go. Kids, you get into the woods, okay? We adults have to take care of this. Geez, Ron grumbled as the adults ran off. They're making it sound like there's a Death Eater attack or something. Neville, who was watching 2 masked wizards levitating a small muggle child and spinning him like a top with a look of distaste on his face, said, I know no one here actually believes in divination, except, perhaps, Harry, but that's 2 for 2, Ron. This is really sick. Ron muttered, shaking his head at the sight, before they all hurried off into the woods. Suddenly, Ron crashed to the ground. Tripped over a tree root. Well, with feet that size, it would be hard not to, Draco drawled from behind them. Hadn't you better be hurrying along now before they spot you? Are you saying that they're going to be able to tell that Hermione's muggleborn and so she's in danger? Harry asked skeptically. Draco raised an eyebrow. Don't be silly. It's dark, they're drunk, they probably don't know who she is anyway, and nothing about her really screams out muggleborn until she starts talking. I was more referring to the fact that they'll probably not be opposed to attacking you, given they blame you for the Dark Lord's downfall. Oh, Harry said, momentarily taken aback. That's thoughtful. You really shouldn't call him the Dark Lord, though. It makes you sound like a Death Eater. You really shouldn't call him by his name, Draco countered. It makes you sound like an idiot. Speaking of Death Eaters, Ron said, glaring at his most hated rival. Where are your parents? Out there wearing masks. Draco just eyed him lazily. How rude. Potter, how can you be friends with such a heathen? We bonded over candy, remember? Harry said absently, scanning the skies. Shouldn't the dark mark be showing up soon? By the time the adults came to get them several hours later after everything was safe again, the dark mark still hadn't made an appearance. That made Harry uneasy, for reasons he couldn't quite explain. Something told him that something unexpected was happening again, but unlike with Pettigrew, he didn't know what. Chapter 36. Harry, who had spent the night before his return to Hogwarts at the Burrow so he could go with the Weasleys, Hermione, and Neville, woke up to the familiar sounds of Ron and Hermione bickering. Seriously, why had it taken him so long to realize that those two had unresolved sexual tension up to their ears? Ah, right, the same reason it had taken him 6 years to realize Ginny liked him. He was oblivious as hell back then. If you ask me, Mr. Crouch is very lucky no one at the Daily Prophet knows how mean he is to elves. Hermione was saying angrily. What are you talking about? Ron replied, sounding exasperated. He was very nice to her. He let her stay in his tent during the match because she was scared of heights and everything. He doesn't pay Winky, Hermione snapped. Therefore she's his slave. No one pays house elves, Hermione, Ron retorted. That's the point of having a house elf. Harry does, Hermione pointed to him as he came into the room. Leave me out of this, Harry requested but went unheeded. Yeah, well Harry's not exactly a shining example of normality, is he? Ron pointed out. Besides, from what I can tell Dobby's pretty off, too. As much as I hate to get involved in your little lover's spat, and believe me, I do hate to get involved, Ron has a point, Neville said, presumably drawn to the kitchen by the sound of shouting. Most house elves get offended if you try to pay them. They don't want to be free. So you're saying it's alright to enslave an entire race of magical creatures? Hermione demanded angrily, turning on him. I'm not saying anything of the sort, Neville held up his hands in a placating gesture. But that's house elf mentality. If you gave them all clothes today and forced them to take payment for their work, less people would want them and they would be very unhappy. You want change, you need to change people's mentality first. HMPH. Besides, since house elves are always enslaved and Mr. Crouch didn't seem to be very abusive when you guys met Winky, I don't anyone, least of all the Daily Prophet, really cares, Harry pointed out. Harry, Mum wanted me to give this to you. Ginny came up behind him and dumped a parcel into Harry's hand. Oh, thanks, I guess, Harry said, a little confused. What is it? Mum figured that since you were running around with Sirius all summer you wouldn't have had time to do your school shopping so she got some gold out of your vault and did it for you, Ginny explained. Why does your mother have access to my Gringotts vault? Harry asked immediately. Ginny shrugged. Who knows? Seriously, I need to see a list of who's authorized because really, the only one who should be able to access it is me and, because of my minor status, my godfather, Harry decided. Ginny sighed loudly. Why do you always make everything so difficult? Can't you just be thankful that she got your school supplies for you? I would, Harry admitted. Except that I already paid Dobby to do it for me. Oh, Ginny said. Well, that's kind of awkward. Oh, don't worry, Harry waved it off. I can just sell them throughout the year to anyone who needs to replace any of their supplies. It will be much faster than I'll post. And that's really an idea. Well, at least you're making the best of everything, Ginny said doubtfully. This means I've got 2 sets of dress robes. Harry mused. I'm only ever actually going to wear one, though. Hey, Ron, he called. Yeah? Ron, who had returned to bickering with Hermione, looked over at him. Due to a shopping error, I now have 2 sets of dress robes. I only need 1 set. Do you want to borrow my second set? Harry offered. Ron made a face. Harry. You know how I feel about Shori Dash. Laundry. Mrs. Weasley announced, walking into the room and handing robes to the occupants. Mum, you gave me Ginny's new dress, Ron said, holding a long, maroon velvet dress robe with a Mulder-looking lace frill at the collar and matching lace cuffs out to her. Harry wondered vaguely why Molly always tried to make Ron wear maroon. It wasn't like she didn't have the exact same hair color, surely she realized he looked horrible in it by now. Was the maroon really the only color available on sale? Couldn't she use a spell to change the color? Ginny snorted. Please. I wouldn't be caught dead in that. Then what dash? Ron began, eyeing the dress robes nervously. Ginny. Molly scolded. Those are your new dress robes, of course. Right, Ron nodded. Harry, is your offer still open? The offer I made 2 minutes ago. Harry asked rhetorically. Of course. Great, Ron looked relieved. What offer is this? Molly asked curiously. Harry's lending me his spare set of dress robes for whatever we need dress robes for, Ron explained. Molly's mouth became a thin line. He most certainly is not. You are going to wear these dress robes and you are going to like it, young man. Mrs. Weasley, Harry cut in hesitantly, hoping the Weasley matron wasn't about to bite his head off. Yes, Harry dear, she asked warmly. I really don't need 2 sets but I currently have them. If I don't let Ron use them then chances are I'll just end up giving them to Dobby and they're too big for him to have any real use for, so he'll probably cut it up and use it as a cleaning cloth and this material is far too nice for that, Harry said earnestly. Well. Molly looked like she was relenting. Besides, you should see Ginny's robes, Ron pointed to his sister's very pretty royal blue dress robes. Ginevra, Molly gasped. Where did you dash? Ginny shot a glare at her brother. There was a sale going on, she lied, still refusing to admit she had money for fear her parents would try and make her wait until she was of age to access it so she'd be responsible with it. Well, she didn't want to be responsible, she wanted to get out of wearing maroon to whatever they needed dress robes for. We will talk about this later, young lady, Molly promised as she swept out of the room. Ginny snorted. When? I'm going back to Hogwarts tomorrow. She is really scary, Hermione said quietly. Oh, are you two still in the room? Harry asked, looking over at her and Neville. Why haven't you said anything for the past 10 minutes? We know better than to invoke the famous Weasley temper, Neville explained. You know, she really reminds me of my gran sometimes, except more maternal. Famous Weasley temper? Harry repeated incredulously. As his four friends nodded, he started laughing. Guys, Mr. Weasley is one of the most even-tempered people I've ever met. The one with the temper is Mrs. Weasley and she's a Pruitt, so wouldn't it be the famous Pruitt temper? I guess, Neville conceded, looking like he couldn't care less. At platform 9 3/4 the next day, Bill and Charlie were having great fun teasing their younger siblings. Except for Percy, who was too busy trying to be a responsible adult and actually working. Clearly this is a sign that Percy hates his family and is just looking for an excuse to throw them over. I might be seeing you all sooner than you think, Charlie said, grinning, as he hugged Ginny goodbye. Why? Fred asked keenly. Are you going to be in Britain for Christmas? Harry asked innocently. Let's go with that, Charlie replied. After all, if it were for any other reason at all, I wouldn't be supposed to say as it's, what was it? Classified information until such time the ministry sees fit to release it. Kind of makes you wonder, really, why in the world it's such a big secret. I mean, anyone even vaguely connected with the ministry knows but the Hogwarts students can't. Harry complained. Charlie eyed him curiously. How do you know Dash? I know everything, Harry said seriously. I thought that was your scar, Hermione said. My scar is a part of me, Harry shrugged. Really, because when you were claiming that you weren't psychic earlier Hermione began. Stop nitpicking, Harry told her, ignoring her outraged gasp and turning back towards the adult Weasley boys. So you know why I sort of wish I was back at Hogwarts this year, Bill said, looking almost wistful. Why? George asked impatiently. Probably because being an adult sucks, Harry guessed. Although since he's a travelling curse breaker I don't see why he'd want to go back to snapper exams. You guys are going to have an interesting year, Bill defended. I might even get some time off to come and watch a bit of it. A bit of what? Ron demanded. Neville shrugged. Who knows? Every year Harry has is pretty interesting and since no one actually tried to kill Harry last year, except possibly Professor Snape for giving serious ideas, this year should be twice as deadly. How does that even work? Ginny asked quizzically. It's Harry, Neville said, as if that explained everything. Which it kind of did. Thanks for having us stay, Mrs. Weasley, Hermione said. Yeah, thanks for everything, Neville added. Oh, it was my pleasure, dears, said Mrs. Weasley. Oh, sure it's her pleasure when it's Ron's friends, Fred muttered. But when we want to have people over it's always we'll see, George added. Or when I want to have friends over it's Ron's friends are around your age or Luna lives right over the hill, Ginny contributed. The twins glared at her for breaking their rhythm. Sorry. It's blatant favoritism, that's what it is, Fred sniffed. Too right, Fred, George agreed. No, it's because last time Lee Jordan came to visit you blew up the house, corrected Mrs. Weasley. We only blew it up a little, Fred insisted. And it's not like you didn't fix it in 5 minutes anyway, George finished. Anyway, Mrs. Weasley sighed. I'd invite you all for Christmas, but, well, I expect you're all going to want to stay at Hogwarts, what with, one thing and another. Oh come on. Ron moaned as they went to go find a compartment. Mum knows, too. She's not even in the ministry. Can't you just tell me what it is, Harry? I could, Harry agreed. But I don't want to. You're not letting them know about the Triwizard Tournament. Luna's ethereal voice came from behind them. Nope, Harry said cheerfully. What's a Triwizard Tournament? Hermione asked, looking a bit irritated not to know when clearly everyone else did. It's a competition that was established 700 years ago between Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang. A representative from each school is chosen and the 3 champions compete in 3 magical tasks. Every 5 years, the schools took turns hosting the tournament. Several centuries ago, however, the death toll got to be too high and they cancelled it, Neville explained. Death toll? Hermione asked, horrified. Well, duh, Hermione, Ron said. Think how easy it is to nearly die just by going to Hogwarts even without the extra danger thrown in. That's awful, Hermione whispered. It's a good thing they cancelled it. Didn't you hear Luna? Harry asked. They're reinstating it. I'm sure Dumbledore has more sense than that, Hermione said skeptically. I wouldn't bet on it, Harry muttered. It's okay, Harry, Luna told him. One of these days the power of our insanity will prove to be too much for her and she'll have to believe. I know, Harry nodded. I just wish that day was today. Father says Durmstrang takes a far more sensible line than Hogwarts about the dark arts. Durmstrang students actually learn them, not just the defense rubbish we do, Draco was saying as he entered their compartment, followed by his two faithful stooges. Mother put her foot down low and said no son of hers would ever be caught dead in a Durmstrang uniform. I can kind of see her point, I'll admit. I mean, who wears fur nowadays, really? Still, think of how much fun I could have learning all sorts of dark spells. So you think Durmstrang would have suited you, do you? Hermione said angrily. I wish you had gone, then we wouldn't have to put up with you. Draco raised an eyebrow. Claws out today, Granger? You just saw Durmstrang doesn't accept Muggleborns. No, Hermione denied. Durmstrang has a horrible reputation. According to appraisal of magical education in Europe, it puts a lot of emphasis on the dark arts. That's not exactly a horrible reputation, Neville pointed out. Although the no Muggleborn policy does draw some criticism from the more moderate factions of Wizarding Society. So, going to enter, Weasley? Draco asked, bored with the discussion of the school he'd chosen not to go to. Going to try to earn a bit of money so you don't have to make Potter buy you everything. Enter what? Ron asked blankly. You don't know? Draco looked amused. Your dad and 3 of your brothers are involved, how can you not know? What about you, Potter? You never miss a chance to show off, after all. Harry shrugged. Probably. I heard they're using an age line to keep anyone under the age of 17 out, but I'm not exactly going to let that stop me. And as for why they don't know, Luna tried to tell them, but they don't believe her. Which is strange because she's right more often than not. It's because what I say sounds strange, Luna explained. And to quote my favorite cricket player, in an insane world the sane appear insane. How do you know about the tournament? Ginny demanded. Wait, you believe Luna and Harry? Ron asked in disbelief. Ginny nodded. I've known Luna for years and everyone knows that the crazier the things that come out of Harry's mouth are, the more accurate they get. Point, Neville acknowledged. Oh, my father found out about it ages ago, Draco said airily. He heard about it from Cornelius Fudge. That's against the rules because it's supposed to be secret until the time comes for it to be revealed. Hermione protested. So what your father did, Malfoy, is wrong. Draco stared at her. Do you honestly expect me to care or something? You should, Hermione said defiantly. Draco laughed. My father was accused of being a Death Eater after the Dark Lord fell and that accusation keeps coming up every time someone doesn't like him. As a wealthy, powerful pureblood lots of people don't like him. When compared to having your father accused of being a terrorist, do you really think it matters in the slightest if he told me about some stupid tournament a few weeks in advance? It should, Hermione repeated. Whatever, Draco shook his head, leaving the compartment, Crabbe and Goyle following silently behind him. Do you think Goyle even knows how to talk? Harry asked idly. What about Crabbe? Ron asked. I always thought he looked stupider. He may not be the brightest guy around, Harry conceded, remembering how he'd managed to kill himself with fiendfire he really shouldn't have been casting in the first place. But he's not that stupid. Your scar again? Hermione asked skeptically. Maybe, Harry muttered. Hey Luna, Ginny asked suddenly. Do you believe in Harry's psychic scar? Oh no, the blonde girl shook her head. Then how do you explain how he always knows everything? Neville inquired. Luna blinked. He's obviously from the future. Hermione stared at her for half a second before bursting out laughing. That's even less likely than his scar being semisentient. Which it totally is, Harry managed to say truthfully, since it was a Horcrux and whatnot, while staring at Luna speculatively. What makes you say that? Ginny wanted to know. Well, how else would you explain it? Luna asked reasonably. Chapter 37. So, you're Dennis Creevey then? Harry asked politely, looking at Colin's younger brother. The small boy had never really forgiven him for Colin's death since, according to him, Colin wouldn't have snuck back into Hogwarts in the first place if it hadn't been Harry's decision to have the battle. Harry wasn't entirely sure about that, but since he'd mostly ignored Colin due to sheer annoyance and he had so obviously idolized him, there was some lingering guilt there. He had already made the effort to be nicer to Colin himself, but he figured it wouldn't hurt to do some work with Dennis either. Aha, Dennis confirmed, nodding excitedly. I fell off the boat on the way up here and Colin said the giant squid pushed me back in. Isn't that awesome? That is quite a story, Harry conceded. Of course, my own boat ride was on a nice, calm night without any drownings and I think it would have been a much pleasanter experience, but I can't really tell people about it because they don't care. You, however, can use your story to terrify all the little first years for the next 6 years. Dennis' eyes widened in anticipation. Awesome. This is Harry Potter, Dennis, Colin introduced reverently. He's probably insane, but really cool. If you ever get really bored, go find him and something exciting is sure to follow. It was, Harry reflected as he moved back to his own seat, better than being sought out because of his evil facial disfigurement. I do hope this year's batch of Gryffindors are up to scratch, nearly headless Nick remarked idly. We don't want to break our winning streak, do we? He paused. Of course, that's not bloody likely with Harry here, but it wouldn't do to get overconfident, would it? I just want you to know that I really hate you right now. Harry glared at the insensitive ghost, who looked remarkably unconcerned. If looks could petrify, though. The opening feast was, of course, fantastic, and Harry was fully engrossed in it when he heard Hermione horror-struck screech. Alarmed, Harry's head shot up in time to hear her say, "There are house elves here. Here at Hogwarts." "Certainly," Nick said, looking surprised at her reaction. "The largest number in any dwelling in Britain, I believe. Over 100. "I've never seen one," said Hermione. "Well, they hardly ever leave the kitchen by day, do they?" said nearly headless Nick. "They come out at night to do a bit of cleaning, see to the fires and so on. I mean, you're not supposed to see them, are you? That's the mark of a good house elf, isn't it, that you don't know it's there?" Hermione stared at him. "But they get paid," she said. "They get holidays, don't they? And sick leave, and pensions and everything." Neville was beginning to look a little pale. "Careful, Hermione. What you're talking about sounds suspiciously like a union." Hermione looked a little confused as to why that was a bad thing before she remembered the poor boy's boggart. "Oh, sorry," she said apologetically. "But don't they get some kind of compensation for their work?" "They get more work and accommodations," Ginny replied. "And they really don't want anything else." "Dobby does," Hermione insisted. "And Dobby gets paid," Ron pointed out. Hermione looked down at her mostly untouched plate of food, then pushed it away from her in disgust. "I will not be a part of this slave labor," she announced. "You know, you really didn't seem to have a problem with the Weasleys' house elf when you stayed with them over the summer," Harry pointed out. "Or did you import all your meals?" Hermione flushed. "That's different." "How?" Ron asked. "I know that your mother treats Slinky kindly and she's always so happy," Hermione replied. Knowing it would only make an annoying situation worse, Harry wisely resisted the urge to point out that Slinky's happiness could very well just be a sign of a thorough indoctrination and Slinky didn't know any better. Instead he asked, "You really think Mrs. Weasley treats house elves better than Professor Dumbledore?" Seriously, he hired Dobby for real wages and he was willing to pay quite a bit more than Dobby was willing to accept, so he had to talk him down. If the other elves wanted it, they could get the same deal. Hermione sniffed. "Just because none of you care about social justice dash." "We talked about this, remember?" Harry interrupted. "Baby steps. Going on a hunger strike won't make the house elves want freedom any quicker, and pushing for immediate emancipation would just freak them out. Instead, you should try studying the laws and policies regarding them and work towards outlawing house elf corporal punishment," he suggested. "Fine," Hermione snapped, realizing that Harry had a good point and reluctantly picking her fork back up. "But for the record, I am not happy about this." Soon, Dumbledore stood up and Harry automatically tuned out the list of rules and tedious announcements. "It is also my painful duty to inform you that the Inter-House Quidditch Cup will not take place this year," Dumbledore was saying when Harry finally tuned back in. "What?" Harry burst out loudly. As everyone turned to stare at him, he figured he might as well go for broke. "But my scar said that the Quidditch pitch shouldn't be occupied until around March or so. Surely the Beauxbatons and Durmstrang students coming in for the Triwizard Tournament aren't demanding we cancel our ONE sport. I mean, for God's sakes, Crumb is a professional Quidditch player." There was a shocked silence, then an outbreak of whispers. Neville groaned. "Harry Potter, Thunder Stealer." Harry snorted. "You want to talk about Thunder Stealers? What about him?" He pointed to the door, which immediately flung open, revealing what appeared to be Alastor Moody. Harry quietly nudged the twins, who were sitting a few seats down from him. "Hey," he whispered. "I'm feeling mildly paranoid. Can you do me a favor and make sure that's really him?" Fred and George exchanged looks and shrugged. Fred pulled out the Marauders map under the table, muttered the password, and examined it for a moment before wiping it clean again. "Yeah, that's him. Alastor Moody." "Damn," Harry swore. George raised his eyebrows. "That's a bad thing?" Harry shook his head. "It's unexpected." "We like unexpected," Fred told him. "Well, I don't," Harry said frankly. "I prefer my chaos to be organized." "That's such a contradiction of terms," George said, shaking his head sadly. "He might be onto something, though," Fred mused thoughtfully. "May I introduce our new defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Moody," Dumbledore said brightly. He paused for a moment. "And yes, Hogwarts does have the pleasure of hosting the Triwizard Tournament this year. So thoughtful of Mr. Potter to inform us all." If it had been anyone else, Harry would have bet that the old headmaster would have been annoyed. Seeing as it was him, however, Dumbledore honestly seemed to think he was being considerate. Typical. "Age line?" Fred moaned. "What does he mean there's an age line?" "It's for our own good, really," Angelina told him, smirking. He glared at her. "You're only saying that because you're already 17. Angelina crossed her arms unrepentantly. "There's got to be a way to beat the age line," George insisted. "We've just got to find it." "I know how to get past it," Harry spoke up. "And I plan on entering." After all, he reasoned, there was still a chance he would be entered since the third task was such a perfect kidnapping opportunity. He didn't think he'd changed anything as far as the tournament itself was concerned, and the third task was traditionally a maze of some sort anyway, so he might as well do it willingly. And since an aging potion wouldn't fool the age line as it could tell how old you really were, it should be able to tell he was in his 20s and let him by no problem. Obviously they hadn't thought to do anything to stop people of age from entering people who weren't, but then he supposed that since most people who could enter would, they wouldn't want to lessen their chances by adding more applicants. Now he only had a month to figure out how to trick the goblet into believing there was a fourth, or fifth, depending on whether one of Voldemort's followers still struck, school. Wouldn't that piss everyone off, though, having 3 Hogwarts champions versus 1 Beauxbatons and 1 Durmstrang contestant? He vaguely hoped it wouldn't start an international incident. If it did, oh well. Better that than a Voldemort incident. You do? Fred asked, a little skeptical. How? George demanded. Harry smirked. Now. That would be telling. For 5 galleons I'll be willing to enter anyone who wants me to. Spread the word. Harry always welcomed the chance to hone his BS abilities and so was quite looking forward to his first divination class. Hermione had dropped at the end of last year, of course, but since she was still taking Muggle studies, the two of them were still using a time turner to get to their one class more than everyone else was taking. Good day, Professor Trelawney greeted them ethereally. She turned to Harry, who was her favorite pupil. Well, she probably would have liked Luna, but the Ravenclaw had opted against taking divination as she felt that the class would be too structured for such a mysterious phenomena as the inner eye. You are preoccupied, my dear, she said mournfully. My inner eye sees past your brave face to the troubled soul within. And I regret to say that your worries are not baseless. I see difficult times ahead for you, alas, most difficult. I fear the thing you dread will indeed come to pass, and perhaps sooner than you think. I know, Harry agreed sadly. I just heard that Ludo Bagman is going to be a judge in the Triwizard Tournament and has bet the goblins that I'll win. You aren't even entered, pointed out Neville. Bagman got a great deal, Harry shrugged. So, about that whole you'll enter anyone thing, can you get me in the tournament? Ron asked hopefully. I can get you into the running, Harry confirmed. As long as Hermione doesn't find out, because I don't want to have to deal with her complaining that I'm cheating or some other such nonsense until afterwards. He shuddered. She might even tell on me. Uncool, Ron agreed. So I'll get you the 5 galleons by next month and don't even think about trying to give me a best friend's discount because I already owe you enough. A light, Harry agreed. Neville. The other boy snorted. Please. Why would I want to go up against the finest Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang has to offer? Because you're stupid. Harry suggested. Neville glared at him. Oh, I didn't mean you, per se, Harry backtracked hurriedly. I just meant, that's why everyone who's not a 6th year who just barely missed the cutoff like the twins wants to enter. They just want the prize money, and maybe the fame. They're not thinking about the competing against the best of the best and the chance they could die. Am I right in saying, my dear, that you were born in midwinter? Trelawney's voice cut through their conversation. Well, Harry trailed off. I, personally, was born in July. My Scar, however, was born on December 31st. I thought your Scar was born on Halloween, Lavender said, puzzled. Oh, no, Harry corrected. That's just when I got it. And that not when it was born. Dean raised an eyebrow quizzically. No, it was born on New Year's Eve, Harry repeated, annoyed. Don't you people listen? We do, Parvati assured him. You just make no sense. What's not to get? Harry demanded. My Scar was born on New Year's Eve and I got it on Halloween. Seems simple enough. You know what? Seamus asked. Never mind. This will not be worth it, I can tell. Spoil sport, Harry muttered bitterly. I can't believe we have so much homework, Ron complained. Just because Trelawney can't take a joke. You told Lavender you wanted to see her anus, pointed out Neville. What did you expect? Hermione, who had been shoveling food into her mouth as quickly as possible, looked up sharply. He said what? Oh, don't you start, Ron said irritably. She already hexed me for it. It's no less than you deserve, Harry told him frankly. You know, in the Muggle world that would be considered sexual harassment and you could get into all sorts of legal trouble. It was a joke. Ron cried. It was a stupid one, Neville said bluntly. And Ginny heard about it from Parvati, so she's out for your blood as well. Oh dear God. Ron groaned, burying his head in his arms. I've got to run, Hermione said, standing up. I'm going to the library. I thought you didn't have any homework, Neville said, surprised. I don't. This is for something else, Hermione said evasively, heading towards the exit. Hermione, I should probably warn you that I trademarked spew over the summer, Harry called after her. She stopped, looking a little disappointed. You did? Why? I started a grammar Nazi organization. Stop people abusing words, Harry explained. That would be SPAW, now spew, Hermione pointed out. I spelled abusing with an E, Harry grinned. It seemed ironic. Anne, this went over well with the grammar Nazis. Hermione couldn't believe it. Harry shrugged. It has the Harry Potter name attached to it, why wouldn't it? Hermione just shook her head and stormed off. No sooner had she left than Fred, George, and Lee Jordan descended upon them. Moody. How cool is he? Fred asked. And still moody, we checked, George added. We had him this afternoon, Lee told Harry, Ron, and Neville. What was he like? Harry asked, honestly curious. He'd never had Moody as a teacher, after all, but Crouch was pretty good and he wanted to know how similar the two teaching styles were. The three older boys exchanged a look full of meaning. Never had a lesson like it, said Fred mysteriously. He knows, man, said Lee. He knows what it's like to be out there doing it, George said, his voice all filled. He's see it all, said Fred. Amazing, Lee concluded. So, he started a cult, then? Harry asked innocently.